It's about the people, it's about the technology, it's about the processes that you have in place that bring those two things together. It's really how we really approach everything.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Seven Figure Journey podcast. My name is Brett Gilliland. I'll be the host for today's episode, and I'm here with Chris Pizzurro. Chris is a co-founder and principal at Leap Media Group. At Leap, they are a television producer, distributor, and advertising services company. They're an independent producer, which is kind of fun. And that builds into how they're able to distribute and advertise and have it all work together. I'm gonna let our guest explain that even more because Chris is way more an expert on that than I am. But welcome to the show, Chris. We're glad that you could be here with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brett. Pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about Leap Media Group so that our listeners can have the right context in their mind as we get into our interview.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. You hit on the first three pillars that we produce shows, we distribute TV shows, and we have an ad revenue that supports all of that. On the production side, we will either acquire programs that other folks have already made. We may co-produce with some other producers, or we may green light and shoot shows on our own. So there's all sorts of ways to go about getting your hands on programming. Buy, beg, borrow, and steal. Then on the distribution side, we have agreements with a whole bunch of TV networks or streaming services in the US and globally, so that we can say, hey, here's this show. Where do we think it most will resonate with someone's audience? So we bring those people those shows. And then, kind of most importantly, is like, okay, that's all great, but where's the money coming from? And we do have an ad marketplace where we do have relationships with either clients directly or with ad agencies that complement our services as an agency. And we tell those folks about our programming and our distribution, and if all of that has value to their clients, and that they're willing to invest in what we're doing. So those are the three legs. Obviously, a lot of ins and outs in all of those things, but those that's it at a high level.
Well, it's not very often. In fact, I'm trying to remember if I've ever had a guest that was in your space. So TV producer and distributor in particular, it's kind of fun for people to consider that. What might be, I don't know, the most well-known show that some of our listeners would go, oh, I've seen that show before.
Yeah, possible. We do a bunch of travel shows with a little travel company called Expedia, which is our main client. So we will work on shows with them. They're producing those shows on their end. We are then distributing and promoting those, and those will show up on broadcast or streaming services. So, for instance, just this past week, over the last month, we worked with Vizio as a distributor. So if you have one of the 22 million people who have a Vizio TV, perhaps when you booted it up and that main screen came up, you saw a big ad that said, watch The Next Turn Orlando, brought to you by Expedia. And you would click on that, and then you could watch the 10-minute program on all the little ins and outs of Orlando that you didn't know about. So there's a good example of how it all comes together, of Expedia as really the producer and the advertiser, and us working with Vizio to get that out to their 22 million households.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that was a fun example, and thank you for indulging me. That was just a curiosity thing for me. Okay, so let's jump into the meat of our program. And thank you for being a guest again. We're gonna make the most of this time. There's two parts of this interview. We're gonna start with the part where you've learned some lessons as a co-founder, as a leader, as a principal. You've learned some lessons about how to scale a business, how to grow a team, how to do this business building work. And any lessons you've learned will be useful to many, many others as they're listening. So, what would you say is a key lesson or two that you've learned in your own journey, going from, what I like to characterize as gritty, scrappy founder entrepreneur to, more capable business building leader?
So we only have a half hour, huh, Brett?
Yeah. Well, one or two key lessons. One or two key lessons. Yeah.
um, uh, at a high level, I would say to start off that it for me it breaks down to what are the people, what's the technology, and third, what processes do you have in place? That's
Mm,
kind of the way I look as we're trying to either working on a individual product or building a company. It's about the people, it's about the technology, it's about the processes that you have in place that bring those two things together.
yeah.
It's really how we really approach everything. Um, when it comes to the people, I would say, Brett, that's one of the more, if you asked me this 30 years ago, when I started in business and all, I would have been like, oh, yeah, you get good people, you get them in, and boy, that's easy breezy, and you just scale up a business. Boy, that's probably one of the most challenging things is finding the right people, putting them into the right job, and retaining them, and all that sort of stuff. To me, that's probably the biggest mistake I made with some earlier companies that we started up was, yep, they started off just fine. And then as you started to scale up, said, yeah, I'll just get some good people, and not so much, right? And that's kind of where the mistakes came. This time around for Leap Media, we are fortunate enough in the media industry, and probably some of your listeners know, and they could see, when big companies like a Paramount or Warner Brothers or a whole bunch of folks are laying people off still, and the media industry goes through its changes. Um, right now for Leap, we are picking up good quality, experienced people
Mm.
who are out for no reason of their own other than just getting caught up. So this time around in scaling this business, we were really quite lucky in finding really good, experienced people to bring on to the team. But sometimes it's just pure luck.
Well, even if the talent is available or more available now than in other times, doesn't mean that you've created something that they want to be part of. And sounds like you have. So I wouldn't completely attribute it to luck. But I hear you. There's some macroeconomic sort of dynamics that make it either talent is more available at a more affordable price or not as available at a really expensive price.
Yes.
So those conditions are maybe out of your control. But creating something worthwhile that other people are interested in being part of, that's amazing. Good for you. Okay,
Yeah.
so I want to go back to the very first thing you said. At least first thing I paid attention to was your simple model of thinking about business as people, technology, and processes. I'm a systems thinker. My training's in organizational behavior, which is just a geeky technical term for understanding how all the parts of an organization come together to get the results that you want. And I love having guests who come with a framing. They're like, "Here's how I see business," or "Here's how I see life," and I like boiling down the the components of like putting together a business to people, technology, and process. It's beautifully simple. Sounds like it serves you well, um, and and I think most people, especially if they deliver some sort of service, sometimes in a product business we kind of forget the value of the people, but in a service-driven type of business, you're delivering a product, but there's a lot of service that goes with TV shows that you're producing and distributing, and especially I would think on the advertising side, you're providing a service, and there's people involved, and and we can't forget how essential it is to surround ourselves with the right people. And it sounds like you've learned a lot of lessons over the years about, let's say, improving your chances of getting the right person in the right seat. Whereas in the earlier days, and this happens to a lot of us, we sort of take it as a given. Well, I'm going to create something, and I'm going to need three of these types of people, and I'm just going to put them in there, and it's not as easy as that. So, yeah, go,
Yeah,
Chris. I'd
and
love to comment on that.
yeah, and even along that, when it does come to the people be like, oh, I need a sales biz dev guy.
Yeah.
And they are two totally different kinds of people, Brett. All right.
Yes.
And people just lump them into one. It's like, no, your biz dev guy is very different than your sales guy. And then when you bring in the engineers, they are a whole other, I know how to talk to salespeople, right? Grew up in sales organizations. Basically, if you just throw a number or you get 10%, 15%, they understand that. And sales guys will go bark up a tree and sell all day long, right? You try that with an engineer, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't care. I just want to put on my headphones. I want to code. And, it took me years, literally years. I'm like, what is up with these people? How can I motivate them? How can I drive? Like, they don't want pens. They don't want money. I mean, everyone wants money, but like that's not the motivating. I mean, what motivates engineers? And it really is that they can work on a good project that gets deployed.
Yeah.
That's what an engineer wants, and that is very different from a sales guy. It's very different than the biz dev guy. So even within those buckets of people that they look like they're the same person, then they're not. There's just these little nuances even within sales to biz dev. That's just amazing. That just amazes me as a observer of people, that it can be that close yet that far apart.
I wish I could somehow magically go to the moments in time over. I mean, you said the term 30 years, but over a long period of time, and just like pick out the moments where you had insights or where you feel like your skill as a leader leveled up. As you look back, can you think of anything in particular that helped you understand the differences between the types of roles or even working with individuals and how to be more effective in leading those people?
Oh, it's ingrained in my mind, Brett. It was my first job at Turner Broadcasting as a digital sales, and I got promoted to manager. So I was now a manager of people, right? Um, and had an office. And one of the young ladies on my staff one day came in, and she closed the door, and I'm like, oh, okay, she's probably going to quit, or just something like that, or wants a raise, right? Um, and she just started crying and said her boyfriend had broken up with her, and that whole angle. And I was like, oh, that's what it means to be a manager. I'm thinking numbers, I'm thinking a whole bunch of other things. And it was that emotional level that, it just knocked me out of left field. And it was right then and there that I'm like, oh, this is what managing is about. It isn't just about the numbers. These are real people with real relationships and real dealings, and they're not going to be able to perform for you 100% unless they're in a good headspace. And before that, I was completely blind to that.
Well, I think you and I don't know that we've been around the exact number of days on this planet, but we could go back to early in our careers and say there used to be a pretty hard line between work life and personal life. It was
Mm-hmm.
like and I appreciate that she shut the door and she's like, hey, I'm not super comfortable sharing this with anybody, but there was an emotional exchange based on something going on in her personal life. And when I was a young professional, it was very much like you kind of keep that stuff at home. You don't bring that to the office. We keep it professional, meant you be a work person when you're with me, and you can be your own self outside of that. And I think we've come a long way. I would say gratefully, from my perspective, I think we've come a long way at recognizing the blended nature of that. Like we're ourselves all the time. We can't just totally segment ourselves and say, I don't have any of those personal problems when I walk through the door at work. I do have those problems. And in fact, it's easier to see it now because many of us are working out of our homes, right? It was like the personal and the work really blended together. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you have any perspective on the changes for good or bad, either direction on that view of the world that we used to have.
Yeah, I no, totally agree. And sure, starting off in this business, the other thing along those lines when I started off, I think I came in when I was 21. I don't think any manager or anyone asked me what I think, what I care, who I was till I was maybe 28. Right? I think I was in the organization 6 years before they even paid attention to me. This young lady was working for me, and yeah, this was probably 3 or 4 months in. Yeah, and I do think it's all for good. I agree with you. The everything that's happened in work life balance and all of that, I do. I think it's fantastic. But yeah, the rate of change on that when it went from, yeah, I don't care who you are, leave it at home, to, yeah, you feel comfortable enough to come in and talk to me as your manager. I think that's a good thing. But yes, that has drastically changed since you and I entered the workforce.
Yeah, it's much different. And when I think about it from the perspective of all our business owners listening, if you're still in a space of leave that stuff at home, I don't want to hear about it. There's not anything wrong with that necessarily. You get to run your business how you want to create it. But if you want to engender a place where people have more connection with you as a leader or just as a fellow human being, people want to come and do meaningful work, but they also want to be
Yes.
connected with other people that they work with, and they want to feel some sort of progress or development. Like I want to be growing in some way. So if you want them to be happy and stay with you, you like their work, you might want to care about, do they feel a sense of purpose or meaning doing work with you? Do they feel connected to other human beings at work that they like to be around? And do they feel like they're progressing or growing in some way? That's our jobs as leaders. If we want to keep people happy, attract people, keep people, that's the kind of stuff that we got to care about. It's different.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Chris, let's shift gears a little bit. Thank you, by the way. It was fun to talk about those elements of your journey. Let's talk
Okay.
about now where you're at today and some of the issues or growth challenges or however you want to frame it, things that you're still trying to learn or figure out as you're trying to grow your business from where it is now.
Um, yeah, and Brett, when you reached out and said, the kind of folks you like to have on and your listeners of where their challenges are, and well, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly where we're at. We're fortunate enough to, last year log our first gross 1.2 million, and this year we've already topped that and on our way. But just like we spoke about those scaling issues when it came to finding the right people. Um, where we've been at the challenge of the last year on the technology side of trying to scale um, with technology ways that complement people.
Hmm.
So to take those processes and whatever processes can be automated. So that's been one challenge of trying to translate what you do every day, day in and day out, to some engineers who don't necessarily know your day in and day out and your business. Um, and so there too, we've been fortunate enough to find some folks who have been in our business, can bring on as engineers and help us to automate some of those processes. But that can be painful at times because, as a person, you just know instinctively kind of what you need to do, or you write it down, you send an email to someone. But in order to make a good piece of software that you need for your business, you need to sit down and really look back over the last year and go, all right, exactly what were we doing? And how do you kind of translate that into lines of code? Is kind of painful for a while there. But once it starts working, now we can log in every day and we can see how any ad campaign we have works across one of our shows, across any distribution we have. And that number's right at our fingertips. So now it's, a wonderful thing But that was quite a challenge and a little painful to try to take your day to day as a manual person and to translate that into a piece of software.
I think that's a useful conversation for other business owners. We could just riff on that for the time that we have remaining. I wasn't clear. Didn't sound like you had a specific question related to that. It was just more like sharing an issue or challenge that you guys have wrestled with recently. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, yeah. In that case, but as far as challenges now, too, I mean, a real question would be from to you and your point of view. Um, and I think a lot of folks that go through this, it's I know my day to day, I know what we're building, I know what it is. For someone to look from the outside in and to say, hey, you know what you're doing, maybe that applies here to this line of business or to this line of business or to this line of business. I mean, that's where I find um, a real interesting conversation with folks like yourself who can just look out in because we're too much in the minutia of the day to day and go, hey, you know what? This guy over here who's building this widget actually, he relates to you like this, and this is how this might work. So I think it's the broadening out of our day to day and how that might apply to other folks in your sphere.
Yeah. Okay. I love that issue. That's a great one. Let me just make one comment about the starting point where you said, "Hey, we learned that it's kind of challenging to take what we know day in and day out and translate that to a conversation with somebody who's going to try to, use technology to automate and streamline processes." Um, Obviously, technology has huge leverage. When we get it right, it can be deployed to do things in a very consistent way, in a very cost effective way. And it's marvelous for all those reasons. And it's only as good as what gets developed, right? So garbage in, garbage out is a principle we've known for a long time, but it really applies to the developing of, I guess I'll call them, um, I guess, company specific apps or software development, software projects that are specific to your business and your processes. Anytime those get built, they're almost immediately outdated, right? Because the processes continue to evolve, and then your software has to
Yeah.
evolve along with it.
Yep.
So as much as we can, I guess, modularize or get really clear on a bite-sized piece of a process or a value delivery chain, like this specific thing, if we can isolate something that can be automated or that we can leverage AI to make more efficient, um, I think that's a great way to go. But if it's a process that is evolving a lot, every time you try to write software against an evolving process, that's danger. So software is no more than um, code applied to a process. So
Right.
we got to get clear on processes, and then we're going to use software or technology to try to make those as efficient as we can, as consistent as we can. But if your process is either uncertain or evolving, it's kind of a waste of time and energy to go put a lot of tech investment on top of that. So it sounds like you've been learning a lot about that.
Yep.
Let's shift to this other issue, which I think is marvelous. I like to say you can't see the label from inside the jar, which is
Yeah.
why
All
which
right.
is why we
Right.
get outside perspective.
Yeah.
And if you guys have created something of great value, whether that's in some IP or a process or a piece of software, and it's applied very specifically to a problem you're solving in your business for your clients. But that same value that you've created could be applied in another industry or another line of business or something like that. I think it's very valuable to get those third party viewpoints from others. That might be a fun podcast idea, right? Just have people come and share their most valuable thing that they've created in their business. People would be reluctant to do that. Maybe it's not a podcast, but I don't know, but a consulting service or something. But here's the thing that I think is valuable, and have somebody who's seen across many different business models, different industries, and say, oh, that would apply very beautifully over here, right? Now you've created value that might actually be transferable to somebody else, and maybe you sell that right, or
Right.
maybe you just partner with other businesses or start something else up. I could see a lot of value creation happening through that type of sharing. So let's talk about ways to get some of that benefit without this I don't know, this made up way that I just kind of shared. I think that's one of the reasons that mastermind groups or like entrepreneur communities are useful. If you can go and share some of the things you're doing with a trusted group of other business owners, sometimes just increasing that I guess field of awareness even a little bit allows other people to have eyes and ears out there and see things and hear things that we wouldn't on our own. But you have to like join a group. So as an example, for several years, it was like 12 years, I was running, maybe 11 and a half. I was running my own community of seven-figure business owners. And we do quarterly events and mastermind groups and all the things that served those businesses so that they could do their scaling work.
Mm,
Well, I eventually realized that I didn't have my own group. I didn't have my own place to
mm,
get that pure stuff. So I created that for them, but I didn't have my own place. So year and a half ago, I went out and joined a local CEO group. And in the process, I immediately expanded the collective thinking about my business. Because when I share with my CEO group, hey, here's what's going on in my business, they're like, oh, have you thought of this? Or we do this in my business. It might be similar for you. I immediately started getting some of those. It's almost like little neurons, jumping neural networks, bouncing back and forth. And I started getting new ideas and new perspectives, even though I'd been swimming in business owners for years, right? But it
mm,
wasn't until I went and joined a group that I started getting some of those same benefits. So I recommend highly the peer to peer kind of stuff that's available out there.
mm.
And then I also entered into a mentoring coaching relationship last year. Chris, you mentioned you're a natural at sales, or you're good at those conversations. You're comfortable with sales people and the sales environment.
Mm,
That's not me. I'm an organizational behavior geek, right? Like I'm a technician. I'm not as much the salesperson. So I went out and got myself a sales coach,
mhm,
and that happens to be a man. So I'll say he helps me see things that I can't see in my process and in my own skill delivery, right? As I have sales conversations with people, and we'll role play, and he'll help me see things. So I like a community or a peer network kind of thing if you can tap into that. And then in specific areas where you could benefit from other insight, getting a mentor or coach kind of relationship also super valuable. So I don't know
mhm.
if I would pick one over the other. I would encourage I would multiple viewpoints from multiple angles, if you will. And that's been really valuable for me. And I've seen that benefit in our community as I've served lots of business owners. They appreciate my perspective and they like each other's perspective.
I- and good for you for doing that, because, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, like, instinctively, I think everyone sure can say, boy, that's a great idea. But then when you get down to it, you're like, oh, I don't have the time. Right? I'm spending 12 hours a day on my, especially as a, as owner of $1 million business. Yeah. Already I have a 12-hour day every day. What am I going to do? 10 o'clock at night, go out and, and that's when the reality of stuff comes in. But it's just one of those things. If you schedule in that hour, you carve out that hour, you force yourself to do it, just like going to the gym or, things like that. If you put it on your calendar and block it out, you can have the time. And those types of perspectives are wonderful. I did one of those about a month ago with other CEOs, and gosh, just I'm sure that's why people listen to your podcast, because you just hear some nugget and you're like, A, that's just a wonderful idea, and B, I can really apply that to my business.
Yes.
And they do. They just fly out of nowhere. Someone's just telling you their experience, and again, I'm sure that's why people listen to you. I forget what it was. There was the CTO of Jersey Mike's, and it was a roundtable thing, and he was the guest, and he was, just talking like we're talking, and boy, that guy threw out three things of, why the just little nuggets of how they got successful along the way. And I was like, I'm taking that one. I'm taking that one. Oh, I'm going to take that one too.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful when people share. It really is.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing our podcast into the conversation. I talked about a peer group and I talked about a coaching relationship. Obviously, we are providing this podcast so that guests like you can share with each other. I
Yeah.
mean, you just shared with lots of other people who you'll never even meet, and somebody will say, "I can take that idea." Chris said, "People and technology and processes." Oh, I love the way. Maybe if I just thought about my business that way, it would just simplify everything. I could see it more clearly. Well,
Yeah.
for you, you've been doing that forever, but for somebody else that was a great idea, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
anyway, podcasts, books, I mean, there are things we need to be doing, but the outside perspective is key. And
Yep.
so I appreciate you raising the issue. And the more in a peer group, especially, or in a mentor relationship, the more people get to know your special sauce. And so you have to be willing to share it. Like, here's this unique value we created. They can start to help you see areas where you might be able to apply that value that you wouldn't have seen other way in another way. Sometimes it's
Yep.
scary to open that up and say, here's something that's unique or special about us, because I'm trying to keep that protected in a competitive environment. So
Yep.
I'm not into giving trade secrets here, but I am saying the more you can open up to trusted people who have good perspectives across a wide variety of businesses, models, industries, whatever, they can then help you get more value out of this thing you created. So
Yep.
awesome. Chris, this has been fun for me. If people want to learn more about Leap Media Group, or if people want to figure out how to connect with Chris Pizzurro online, how would they do that?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Anyone can go to leapmediagroup.net on the web, all one word, leapmediagroup.net. And yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out for me if you want. It's Chris at leapmediagroupllc.com. Just to just to throw you a curveball there, Brett. I don't want to make it too easy for you, but it's
Yeah.
Chris at leapmediagroupllc.com. Check it out. And yeah, to a fault sometimes, Brett, I'm a little bit of an open book, but we, as entrepreneurs, whatever we create today, we're just going to keep creating. So if someone wants to take something or take an idea, go ahead. I have no problem sharing. I'm going to come up with another one overnight anyway. So it's all good.
I love it. Great attitude and abundant mindset. Yeah, please check out leapmediagroup.net. And connect with Chris if you have any interest in learning more about what they're doing, or just connecting with him as a business owner who's obviously very open to sharing ideas. Okay, that's it for this episode. Keep listening, sharing, liking, commenting, do all those things to help these episodes get in front of as many seven-figure business owners as possible. We're trying to bring real business owners with real growth lessons that they've learned and real issues that they're still wrestling with to help as many of you all as possible. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Seven Figure Journey podcast.